All right, Chapter 6, Key Issue 2. Why do religions have different distributions? I won't spend a lot of time on the history, although it is kind of fun. This is a longer key issue, and I want to get into more of the diffusion and anything. But remember, the origins of Buddhism, remember that was the prince uh, who went out into the woods for 6 years after finding out that life wasn't always so privileged behind the palace walls. Origins of Christianity, I think you're all familiar with that. Jesus was born in Bethlehem. Obviously, he preached the coming to the kingdom of God. Obviously, his resurrection provides hope for salvation. The Bible is his miracles and deeds. Protestants, I would be familiar with this because obviously they're going to split away from the Catholic Church. They split in the 1500s when Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to the church door. Basically, his 95 complaints about having to be a Catholic, and created his own church. He felt that salvation through communication with God was good enough. He didn't have to do the sacraments that, if you're Catholic, you're familiar with. So he created Protestantism, mostly in Germany. The origins of Islam, we talked about the family tree before. Remember, they believe they descend from Ishmael, which is also a descendant of Abraham. Jews and Christians trace their history through Abraham and his wife Sarah and their son Isaac. I remember that was kind of the soap opera that we talked about. Ishmael's descendant Muhammad became the prophet of Islam. Remember, Muhammad was, according to Islam, the third and final prophet to come. He was there to correct the first two from Abraham and Jesus. So Jesus and Abraham are mentioned multiple times in the Quran, the Islamic holy book. And remember, we'll get into diffusion, they're the only religion the most important in the homeland of the man who founded it. So Muhammad was from what is now Saudi Arabia, and obviously it's still the most important religion in that country. Buddhism, Hinduism, Christianity are all obviously very important religions, but they are now more important somewhere else. And that's what that statement means. Christianity obviously is much bigger outside of Israel and so on. The 5 pillars, if this comes up, is what every Muslim must follow. They worship only one God, that's Allah. Pray 5 times daily, and they always must face Mecca, their holiest city. Fast during the month of Ramadan. Give generously to charity and make a pilgrimage to Mecca, which is also called a Hajj. All right, the diffusion. Christianity diffuses through relocation, expansion, hierarchical, and contagious. Obviously, that's a lot of diffusions, but obviously it's a very old religion, so it's going to have much more variety in the way it's going to spread throughout its history. It spreads first through relocation. One of the disciples, Paul, starts bringing the idea everywhere else. Remember, that's relocation diffusion. It would eventually become contagious diffusion with the Roman Empire as they began to conquer more parts of Europe and even parts of North Africa. Obviously, it becomes more hierarchical under the Roman Empire when the emperor becomes Christian himself. And there's kind of a map that kind of shows you the history of all this. If you look at the dark brown, that's where it is in AD 325, not very far. Lighter brown is by 600, is obviously beginning to expand with the Roman Empire. And then if you look at basically all of Europe by 1100 is essentially all Christian, whether it's relocation or hierarchical diffusion. And those lines on there are Paul, one of the disciples. And so he took several journeys, obviously leaving Jerusalem to spread the word, relocation diffusion. Diffusion of Islam, Muslims conquer places. Obviously, you've heard about the Crusades. There were multiple Crusades. As they begin to expand out of Saudi Arabia, they conquered what was then Palestine, the Persian Empire, and India. Obviously, if you're converting the losers, this is going to be hierarchical diffusion. They would take over North Africa, Western Europe, and that's why you see a lot of Muslims in Europe today, not because they are refugees more recently, but early on during the Crusades, they were converted to Islam. And obviously, Indonesia, we talked about Indonesia being the largest Muslim country in the entire world, largest by population. And that's because as the Arabs began to prosper and began to get richer, they began to trade. And that Indonesia was along their trade route. So that's obviously going to be what kind of diffusion? Relocation. Buddhism, again, did not spread quickly from its hearth in India. Again, this is where we're back to that original statement. It begins in India, but obviously it's more important in places in East Asia like China and Korea and Japan. But mostly it's going to be, it spreads from relocation diffusion. Traders bringing an idea from India into China and Japan and so forth. Remember, Buddhism is what kind of religion? Universal or ethnic? It's universal. It's more widespread. It's more than one country. It's multiple countries. Ethnic is usually going to be in one place. Okay, we'll pause it there.